There are three big players in the climate change debate: national government, corporations and civil society. And Professor Bobby Banerjee here at CAS has been speaking to representatives of all of them on 5 continents. Professor Banerjee is with me now. Professor Banerjee, how do attitudes among corporations differ around the world towards climate change?
It depends a lot on the industry in terms of how impacted they are. And also one has to be careful in unpacking what they actually say and what they actually do. There was a time when, about 10-15 years ago, when climate change, some of these big companies actually used to deny climate change happened. They, for example, Exxon, Shell and BP, they funded research to show that climate change was a myth. That's changed over the last 6-7 years as the evidence has mounted. So you'll find very few deniers, at least officially, in the corporate sector. The responses range from being very reactive, is fighting legislation, opposing any kind of mandatory targets. Everything is voluntary. We'll be efficient. We'll be good. We'll reduce our carbon. We don't need governments. We don't need any kind of agreement. To more proactive in the sense that investing in new technologies, new energy avenues for renewable energies, those kind of so there's a range.
And there are and actually fairly predictable difference in attitudes between countries such as the United States and Germany.
Yes, definitely. And it's partly cultural. The US industry in general tends to be more litigious, so they kind of oppose any kind of legislation. They've seen the writing on the wall. They know sooner or later there's going to be some, but the US continues to have no mandatory emissions reduction program. They don't even have a voluntary one, except in some states. California has one, a few states in the West Coast. The UK has a mandatory emissions trading. The EU has one. Australia just introduced a carbon tax in there. So it varies as well in terms of the industry, in terms of what corporations want to do and what they oppose. What we found is that there was and these are preliminary results, the research is still ongoing, definitely in places like Germany and the UK, I would say that they were a bit more ahead in terms of understanding the risks to their business. Especially the utilities companies, the ones who are going to be hit the hardest, who are coal dependent, some of the CEOs we spoke to basically said, yes, it is a clear possibility that our industry could cease to exist, in case some new technology comes out.
These are fairly predictable attitudes. Why are the companies taking these fairly obvious positions?
I think the difference is the complexity of the issue. It's not just an environmental issue in there. You're talking about energy there, which is pretty much the engine of any kind of economic growth. It's not about reducing pollution or cleaning up, waste management. Those are end-of-the-pipe solutions. This goes to the core of any organization, any company, in terms of how do we manage to use energy. And that I think people are having a hard time grappling with, because there's a certain limit you have with energy efficiency. That's the low-hanging fruit. What happens when you actually reach the limits? To give you an example, a lot of companies focus on what they call emissions intensity. So which means that they will reduce the emissions per unit of production, which is great. But what happens if you're selling twice as much? The overall emissions go up. So the way the debate is being constructed, and this is the power of the industry lobby as well, is that, okay, let's have some targets on emissions intensity, but not on overall emissions. So the fundamental model of the growth model is not being challenged, because these are hard questions to ask and even harder answers to emerge. So I think the difference between the rest of what I would call environmental problems is that climate change is inherently a very political issue. And without national and international agreement, there really cannot be a major step in any direction.
Has the time come for businesses to accept that climate change is taking place?
I think most companies have accepted it's happening.
And that it's man-made?
Yes, at least most of them are saying that. At least you wouldn't find, as I said, even 8-10 years ago, you would find on companies' website that we don't know if it's man-made. I think most companies now accept the science. That is uniform across the different countries we've talked to. The difference is the extent of the man-made, and then the argument is if you put in too many laws or too many emissions reduction targets, then jobs will go. So it's the balance between the economy and climate change. That's the debate which is being played out, as opposed to what is good for the planet or what is bad for the planet.
Professor Bobby Banerjee, thank you very much.
Thanks.